The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Donalds, is now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, witnesses, for coming. Attorney General Ellison, welcome back. Good to see you here as well. Let me be very clear with everybody here. I am the sponsor in the House for the bill that repeals the CFPB. So I want to just level set for a moment. I'm not a fan of the agency, never was. I actually am glad that members have talked about the history of how we got to this point. I was actually a part of the commercial banking industry from 2003 through 2007. I was watching, Mr. Chairman, it's actually my first congressional committee I ever watched as an American citizen was the House Financial Services Committee, because I was actually an industry participant. I worked in the industry. So I saw the deliberations about TARP and all that stuff, and then the deliberations on Dodd-Frank. One of the issues for CFPB is that it is a highly partisan agency because it was created under partisan parameters. It was one-party vote, one-party rule that created CFPB. If you were to ask me if the CFPB is unconstitutional as a whole, I would say yes, because the way I view it, there is no oversight, obviously. Its funding comes out of the Fed. We all know that. If you ask Chairman Powell, he doesn't know how much money goes into the CFPB. A letter shows up. They say, okay, they get their money. They go on about their business. So there is no oversight of CFPB at all writ large. It appears to be a freelancer more than a regulator. It goes and it roams the countryside looking for products that may or may not pop up, and then it decides, frankly, at the direction of the director, if it likes the product or not. That is not a regulator. That is a freelancer. And so, a couple questions real quick. Mr. Hempler, do vehicle loans pose a systemic risk to the American economy?
No.
Mr. Johnson, do credit card late fees pose a systemic risk to the American economy?
No.
Let me ask you this question, Mr. Johnson. Are there serious issues about not only separation of powers, but due process at the CFPB, and can you detail them?
Congressman, I have in my extended written statements, I've provided a list of roughly 30 instances that, in my view, constitute due process or separation of powers concerns, or the Bureau overreaching its statutory authority.
Can you go into detail about one of your comments where they pressured financial institutions to waive attorney-client privilege during supervisory examinations?
Sure. So the Supreme Court has been very clear that when Congress enacts a statute, including the CFPB's enabling statute, if it wishes to abrogate a common law privilege, and especially one as foundational as attorney-client privilege, it must do so expressly. So there is no express abrogation in Title X of attorney-client privilege. In other words, the CFPB lacks authority to compel institutions in any capacity to waive attorney-client privilege. It's especially troubling in the context of supervisory examinations because all of that communication with the Bureau is secret and can't be made public. And so there's a ripe opportunity for the Bureau to pressure institutions in a non-public setting.
I got to cut you off. And I thank you for the more layman example, because I'm not an attorney. I'm a finance guy, so I appreciate that. Thank you. Mr. Attorney General, do you think it's okay for the CFPB to force financial institutions to waive attorney-client privileges?
I think it would depend, but I'd like you to prove that that is in fact what is going on. I think you need to demonstrate that. I mean, that's an allegation, but I'd like to know what facts you're using to make that claim. And I think certainly there are occasions in which the attorney-client privilege is not, I mean, I've been an attorney for 30 years, and I can tell you that there are occasions in which that veil is pierced. Depends.
All right, I'm going to ask you one final question, because actually in your testimony, and you've been citing it about the work that you did with CFPB, your state, and I forget the other state that was involved with respect to the student loan fraudsters. And actually, I do want to thank you for prosecuting that, because we should not have, fraudsters roaming through the financial landscape. Everybody, I believe, agrees with that wholeheartedly. So when we find that stuff, we have to root it out of the system. Totally agree with you there. You also state that the CFPB's civil penalty fund secured $95 million in refunds for the affected parties.
That's right.
Because the perpetrators obviously didn't have the funds to pay people back.
Right.
where does the CFPB get its money in the civil penalty fund?
Yeah, well, it gets the money through the resolution of other matters, and so that's
So fines levied on other institutions were then used to give out rewards in other areas.
right, which is an appropriate thing to do and happens all the time.
All right. I yield back.
The
Thank you.
gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, is now recognized.